Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. ثم سوء الحفظ وهو السبب العاشر من أسباب الطعن والمراد به من لم يرجح جانب إصابته على جانب خطئه وهو على قسمين. The final reason for طعن في الحديث or طعن في المتن here specifically is سوء الحفظ. Okay, or طعن في الراوي سوء الحفظ, that a defective memory, a bad memory. وهو السبب العاشر من أسباب الطعن. This is the 10th sabab from the causes of criticisms. What does it mean? والمراد به من لم يرجح جانب إصابته على جانب خطئه. By سوء الحفظ we mean that person whose um, uh, whose non-mistakes, so his corrections, his correct iterations are not overpowered by his mistakes, meaning that he has more mistakes than he has correct or correct transmissions. So he's basically saying that his correct transmission should not be overpowered by his mistakes. If there is more correct transmissions over the mistakes, then we will not call this person su'ul hifz. We will just call it an anomaly that here and there by dint of someone being a human being, they make mistakes. But here, su'ul hifz is when somebody's mistakes are more than their corrections. That's what it means. Does that make sense?
Yes.
وَهُوَ عَلَى قِسْمَيْن. There are two
Yes.
types. Type number one is what we called lazimi, which is a long-term inherent su'ul hifz. And type number two is a temporal one or a temporary one. إن كان لازما للراوي في جميع حالته فهو الشاذ على رأي بعض أهل الحديث. If it is something which is continuous lazim with the rawi in every occasion, for example, the rawi was born with a weak memory. So if the rawi is born with a weak memory, then there's really nothing much that you can do about it. So فهو الشاذ, so the riwayat of this weak rawi whose weakness is luzumi, is kind of inherent, his riwayat will be categorized as shaz على رأي بعض أهل الحديث, according to the opinion of some of the scholars of hadith. So why did he say according to the opinions of some of the scholars of hadith? Remember when we read in shaz, when we read in the description of shaz, shaz is when a thiqa rawi does mukhalafa of arjih ruwat. Yeah, when a strong rawi does mukhalafa, contradicts the ahadith of those narrators who are more rajih or more stronger than himself or herself. So the condition for a hadith to be shaz is that there needs to be an element of mukhalafa. If there
Mm.
isn't an element of mukhalafa, then this is not shadh. In the same way that we have read previously that those things which is fahsh, ghalat, and ghafla and fisq is munkar, but according to some scholars, munkar is the hadith where a weak narrator does mukhalafat of a stronger narrator. So again, there is an element of mukhalafa. But some scholars said yes, but it's not necessarily that in order for a hadith to be munkar, there needs to be mukhalafa. So the hadith of the fahish ghalat, the hadith of the ghafil is also munkar. So here, some scholars are saying that a hadith where the muhaddith has su'ul hifz, and that su'ul hifz is lazimi, it is an inherent one, then the hadith of that rawi And when you say hadith means the entire isnad, because the isnad is judged according to the weakest ruwat, rawi. So if this person is the weakest rawi, then this hadith will be an anomaly shaz. And the reason why these scholars say shaz is because they don't stipulate a condition of mukhalafa in shaz. Those who
Mm.
basically say no, this cannot be shaz because shaz always has to have a condition of mukhalafa, they basically say that this hadith is actually da'if. In reality, this is pish posh. There is no difference, because a shaz is a weak, well, primarily shaz is a weak narration, and a da'if is a weak narration. This is just kind of hair splitting. Call it shaz or call it da'if. The hadith of a person whose su'ul hifz is primarily da'if. It's the weakest. It's the no, it's the strongest of the weakest from these 10, but it's still weak. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So the second one is أو إن كان سوء الحفظ طارئا على الراوي, or if the weakness of memory is foisted upon the rawi. طارئا, طارئ means it came upon him. It is not inherent, is exterior to him, is out with of him. Then, which basically means that he wasn't born like that, he wasn't like that, something happened and he had a loss of memory. Imma li kibarihi, either because of him being of old age, senile, aw li dhahabi basarihi, or because his eyes have he's gone blind or his eyes have weakened, aw li ihtiraqi kutubihi aw adamiha, or because of his books getting burnt or they're being non-existent. Okay, so you can see that kibar here. So there's two types of transmission, right? You can either transmit from your memory or you
Mhm.
can transmit from a book. Okay, primarily half and half. Gregor Scholler is a scholar from um, Edinburgh. He actually looked at the amount of riwayats that are actually riwayah from memory and actually the riwayah from reading, and he devised a methodology of ascertaining that, and he came to the conclusion that they're actually half and half. Some scholars will focus only on memory, others will actually read from their books. So kibar here, the person has become senile as a result of which the memory is weak. And then these ones, ذهاب بصره واحتراق كتبه أو عدمه, these relate primarily to somebody who is relying on books and all their notes are on in the books, and because his eyes are weakened now he can't see properly, or because the books no longer exist, or because or the books are burnt. Now the scholar has to um, rely on his memory, and when he's relying on his memory he's making mistakes. Does that make sense? So this is external to the person. It wasn't in, it's not inherent. بأن كان يعتمدها فرجع إلى حفظه فساء فهذا هو المختلط. In the sense that he used to rely upon these books, and now because they have got burnt, رجع إلى حفظه, he resorts back to his memory, فساء, and he's making mistakes. فهذا هو المختلط. This person is the مختلط, the person who is confused, and the hadith is known as مختلط, the hadith which has been confused. Okay, so what is the hukum of this one? So they've given a hukum of the su'ul hifz, which is lazimi, that it is always da'if. But what about the su'ul hifz, which was, or the rawi, whose su'ul hifz is because of a mishap and not something which is um, permanent, or which is inherent rather than permanent, which is inherent. So there was a point in his life that this rawi may have been a strong rawi, and now because of this mishap no longer is able to recall or retain that information again. So what is the hukum of that rawi? والحكم فيه أن ما حدث به قبل الاختلاط إذا تميز قبل وإذا لم يتميز توقف فيه وكذا من اشتبه الأمر فيه. The hukum is that whoever narrates ما حدث به قبل, whatever he has narrated before his confusion, إذا تميز, if it can be discerned, if it can be separated, قبل, it is accepted. وإذا لم يتميز, and if it cannot be discerned, you can't separate the two parts of his life and the riwayats in the two parts of his life, توقف فيه, you will take a non-committed view, suspend judgment on this. وكذا من اشتبه الأمر فيه, and similarly, the rawi who من اشتبه الأمر فيه, where there is the situation has now become confused as to whether so this is the rawi, whether he narrated before the narration or before becoming senile or after becoming senile. There's an ishtibah, he doesn't remember. So how would you know? How would you determine? How would you ascertain? So you say وإنما يعرف ذلك باعتبار الآخذين عنه. The way that you will know this is by knowing the people who have narrated, who have taken hadith from the person. For example, the Rawi Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama. Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama, Imam Malik and Imam al-Thawri, Sufyan al-Thawri, have declared him to be weak. And the reason why they have declared him to be weak is because they met him when he was senile. And they wanted to narrate hadith from him, but they didn't find him very accurate. Okay. But if you look at Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama's elder students like Ibn Abi Dhi'b, then you will find that the riwayat are accurate. And this is why with Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama, any narration that Imam Ibn Abi Dhi'b has narrated from Salih at-Taw'ama, because Salih at-Taw'ama finished narrating from him before he became senile, the latter became senile, you can basically have some kind of confirmation, affirmation that this riwayat is strong. If you see Malik narrating from Salih or al-Thawri narrating from Salih, then know that this will be weak. So then what happens is that you have these minute idiosyncrasies about, you need to learn certain things about certain rawis, like Salih Mawla Taw'ama. You need to know that he became senile, and there are two categories of rawis. These are the ones who heard before him. These are the ones, and learn the names of Ibn Abi Dhib heard before him, before he became senile. Malik heard afterwards, and so you need to learn those kind of little things. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Well, just a quick question. Just to confirm, if it's Tari'an, then whatever narrated before the kind of event, like losing memory, etc., and this can be easily determined, then it is accepted, or
Yes.
does it still need a secondary kind of affirmation or something?
No. Providing that the narrator before becoming senile was sahih anyway, or
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. ومتى توبع السيء حفظ بمعتبر كأن يكون فوقه أو مثله لا دونه، وكذا المختلط الذي لم يتميز، والمستور، والإسناد المرسل، وكذا المدلس إذا لم يعرف المحذوف منه صار حديثهم حسنا لا لذاته. And when the سيء الحفظ راوي has got a متابعة with another rawi who has the capacity to be considered as a mutaba'a. Yeah. Do you remember in the discussion of mutaba'at, we basically said that there are two number of type of follow-ups. One is mutaba'a, number two is shawahid, and the third category is called al-i'tibar. And al-i'tibar literally means the process of doing shawahid and mutaba'a. I'tibar is not a category like shahid and mutaba'a. I'tibar is actually the process of doing mutaba'a and shahid. So a mu'tabar rawi is a rawi who in and of himself is not a very high quality rawi. However, he's not a low quality rawi, and therefore a mu'tabar rawi can be used as a mutaba'a and a secondary source of fortification and consideration of the hadith, and not necessarily a primary source. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Is it,
the Marta, so this Rawi is basically in like a middle position between.
yeah.
Okay.
So don't be confused by the word mu'tabar, which basically means somebody who's reliable. Um, it doesn't mean somebody who's reliable here. It means somebody that has the capacity to be relied upon. It is a technical terminology. A
Mm,
mu'tabar rawi in the technical sense of the word is not a sahih rawi or a hasan rawi.
okay.
It's a weak rawi, but the weakness is not
Oh,
so bad that we have to basically discard it. The weakness is tolerable, that in and of itself we will not accept that rawi's hadith. However, if he is uh, uh, um, acting as a secondary evidence for someone else, then we will consider it. Does that make
got it.
sense?
Would that be, would this Rawi be characterized with Su al-Hifz, or is that
So,
that would be?
so,
But
so, so this is what we're saying. A su'ul hifz rawi, a rawi who's got su'ul hifz is a mu'tabar rawi. Yeah,
got it.
mu'tabar in the sense of i'tibar, that you can use him as a secondary, but not necessarily as a primary source.
Got it.
Similarly, a rawi who is ghafil, a rawi who is fasiq, a rawi who is bid'ati, these can all be used in the process of i'tibar as shawahid, not shawahid, shawahid is to do with the sahabi, as mutaba'a, but not necessarily as primary that you are establishing the hadith primarily through that particular isnad. Does that make sense?
I guess it will make sense if I understand one thing.
Yes.
Who is the weak Rawi, the da'if Rawi that would not be mu'tabar? Is that if it's
Yeah,
a mawdu'a,
a
a
kazab,
kazzab?
yeah,
Okay, that's it.
a muttaham bil kizb, the munkar, yeah,
Got it. Got it.
some of
Okay.
the type of munkar. Yeah. So do you remember in the beginning of the discussion of mardud? Yeah, I
Yes.
basically made it very clear that although mardud means rejected, but
Right.
don't go with the literal definition here, because there will be I said there will be many that can be salvaged because of secondary
Right.
evidence. That's why I was very careful not to translate it as rejected, because if you translate it as rejected and now we are salvaging these hadiths and say, well, how can they be from the category of mardud is basically hadiths with weaknesses inside. Some hadiths, the weaknesses are so great that they cannot be salvaged, and others that the weakness is tolerable that they can be salvaged if we were to get secondary fortification evidence for them. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes.
So
Thank you.
now, yes, Hussein.
I was going to ask, in this, who's doing the supporting? Is the Mu'tabar doing the supporting of the Surah Hifz, or the Surah Hifz doing the supporting of the Mu'tabar, or does it not matter?
So the the hadith that you are focusing on, that
Yeah.
will always be your asal,
Okay.
and your other evidences will be your mutaba'a. If the mutaba'a now becomes your asal, then this one becomes your mutaba'a. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Understood. Understood.
So it's
Understood.
relative. It's up to you. So here
Oh,
we are focusing on the su'ul hifz. Yeah, the su'ul let's say Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama. Yeah, we are focusing on Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama. Now, Salih Mawla at-Taw'ama's narration, even the weak narration, we will not reject them, because Imam Malik narrates from him, and Imam Malik calls him weak, but then Sufyan al-Thawri also narrates from him as well. So we'll get Sufyan al-Thawri's riwayat, and that becomes a fortification. Does that make sense? So look, وَمَتَى تُوبِعَ السَّيِّئُ الْحِفْزُ بِمُعْتَبَرٍ. The mu'tabar is the rawi which is salihun lil i'tibar, ay salihun lil mutaba'a, and not reliable. Somebody that is capable of being relied upon as a secondary evidence. Does that make sense?
yes.
Such as كأن يكون فوقه, such as that the mu'tabar rawi is higher than him, but not so high, that it goes to the level of Hassan, and it goes to the level of Sahih, because then we don't need to actually look at the riwayat of the Su'ul Hifz, because we have a Hassan and Sahih narrator. The Su'ul Hifz is the least of it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's still a weak rawi, but that weak rawi might be stronger than the Sayyul Hifz, or أو مثله, or on the same level, la dunahu, but cannot be weaker than him. Yeah. So there we go. So there might be another Sayyul Hifz. So two Sayyul Hifz, if they are saying the same thing, okay, they have bad memories, but that doesn't mean that people with bad memories don't get it right sometimes. And if two or three or four people, all of them have got bad memories, and if they are saying the same thing, the chances are that they've got it right. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just basically statistics. وكذا المختلط الذي لم يتميز, and similarly the ahadith which one is not able to discern as to whether this is a before or after. That hadith also, if he has i'tibarat, if he has tawabi', then that also so what did he say? uh, so this is the khabar, صار حديثهم حسنا, that hadith also becomes hasan. Wal mastur, the riwayat of the mastur also. Mastur is the one which is majhulul hal, the one where two rawis have narrated from him, but nobody has given a character reference to him. That's the mastur. Similarly, the isnad al mursal, the mursal isnad, which is where the sahabi is missing. If more than two people with that same chain knock out the sahabi and directly narrate from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وكذا المدلس, and similarly the mudallas hadith, if there are a few people who are saying the same hadith and then knocking out the same rawi and going to the rawi's rawi, إذا لم يعرف المحذوم منه صار حديثهم حسنا. All of these people, the سيء الحفظ, the mukhtalit, the mustur, the mudallas, the isnad al-mursal, all of them, if they have mutaba'ah, then صار حديثهم حسنا. So that's the kind of mubtada, or you can say the shart, and that's the khabar or the jaza. Yeah, صار حديثهم حسنا. This is why it is important that you don't translate mardud as rejected. Yeah. نعم لا لذاته. Yes, it's not Hasan li dhatihi, it's Hasan li ghayrihi, which is weak hadith. Weak hadith is when there are so many weak hadiths and they're all saying the same thing, then they kind of support each other. But wasfuhu it's supposed to be wasafahu, or it can be wasafahu bidhalika, or if you make it a madhi. uh, but it has been characterized as Hasan باعتبار المجهول. So it has been characterized as Hasan بذلك أي بل وصفه بالحسن باعتبار المجهول. Collectively it's the cumulative of the متابع and the متابع, that من المتابع المتابع, that's why you say the cumulative of the متابع and the متابع. Because of that characterization it has become Hasan, but not لذاته but لغيره, لأن كل واحد منهم احتمال أن تكون روايته صوابا أو غير صواب, because every single one of them has got the capacity that the riwayat will either be correct or not correct على حد سواء individually. So yeah, the mutabi' his riwayat individually can 50-50 can be correct or not, and the mutaba' his riwayat can be 50-50 correct or not. فإذا جاءت من المعتبرين رواية موافقة لأحدهم رجح أحد الجانبين من الاحتمالين المذكورين. And therefore, when you have إذا جاءت من المعتبرين رواية موافقة, when you have from those people who are capable of being acting in the process of i'tibar, corresponding narration to each or to one of them, رجح أحد الجانبين من الاحتمالين المذكورين, then one of the two sides of the possibilities are privilege, which is the Sahih side, and as a result of that we will basically say that this is Hasan لغيره, because you've got two logical possibilities, 50-50 chance that each individual rawis, their narrations can either be 50% correct or 50% incorrect. When you put them together, 4 or 5 of these riwayats, and all of them are muwafiq to each other, then the correct possibility becomes more outweighed than the incorrect possibilities, because it can't be coincidence that all 4 or 5 of them are getting it right. This is what it's saying. But the point here, the 2 points here you need to understand is that mardud in technical hadith science doesn't necessarily mean rejected, and certainly i'tibar or mu'tabar doesn't mean a reliable narrator in the sense of a Hasan or Sahih narrator. Rather, mu'tabar or i'tibar is a technical terminology. When we say huwa salihun lil i'tibar, it basically means that this is a weak narrator, but this person can act as a follow-up, as a mutaba'a, but not as an independent narration. The independent narration itself won't be accepted, but if there is mutaba'a, if he's doing mutaba'a of someone else, then that will be accepted. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
you will get a number of ahadith in Sahih al-Bukhari where the ahadiths are not exactly on the same level of Sahih, um, uh, but Imam al-Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi brings those as i'tibar, as secondary evidences. So when we say that every hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari is sahih, it basically means the primary objectives of of Imam al-Bukhari, those hadiths is sahih. But other things, for example, he has a number of mu'allaqat. Mu'allaqat, mu'allaq is a hadith without an isnad. He has a number of mu'allaqat. We don't actually comment on the mu'allaqat because a mu'allaq hadith is a weak hadith. So there are all of these other different things in the Sahih al-Bukhari which people don't know about. There's a lot of i'tibarat in there, but that's okay because it doesn't go against. He knows very well, but he's just bringing those as secondary evidences. The hadith is sahih of the highest level, but he's still bringing more hadith to kind of make the case stronger. Yeah. Okay. ودل ذلك على أن الحديث محفوظ, and this is an indication that this particular hadith is mahfuz. So the hadith of the Sayyul Hibs, the hadith of the Mukhtalit, the hadith of the Mukhtalit غير متميز, the hadith of the Mastur al-Hal, the hadith of the Mudallas, the hadith of the Mursal, these are mahfuz, right? because of this pathway. So if they are mahfuz, then how can they be mardud? Yeah, that's why
Right.
from the outset, you should basically not translate mardud as rejected, but something which has got some weaknesses inside it. Now, somebody had a question?
No. I was just saying, okay.
فارتقى من درجة التوقف إلى درجة القبول. And as a result of this, these hadiths become elevated from the status of tawaqquf, okay, or non-commitment, to the status of qabul. Again, how can a mardud hadith be maqbul? Yeah. So ومع ارتقائه إلى درجة القبول فهو منحت عن رتبة الحسن لذاته. But despite being elevated to the level of the maqbul, however, it falls short of the categorization of the inherently Hasan hadith. وربما توقف بعضهم عن إطلاق اسم الحسن عليه, and some scholars sometimes refrain from categorizing these ahadith as Hasan. Okay, so he's given the logical justification for why we call this hadith Hasan li ghayrihi, and at the end he basically says, but other scholars are not too keen on calling them Hasan li ghayrihi. They just call it da'if. Okay, and therefore we need to basically be careful when we look at, say, this hadith is Hasan. We need to be careful how the ulama use it. Sometimes ulama use those terms very clumsily without the nuances, but other times they may use the hadith, use the terminologies with nuances. Some scholar might be adamant, especially the earlier scholars, that there's no such thing as Hasan li ghayrihi, so they'll call that hadith da'if. Okay, a later scholar might basically call it Hasan, but he won't tell you it's Hasan li ghayrihi. Therefore, it is also important, in addition to knowing the mustalah, the terminologies, you need to also know the usage of these terminologies by each individual scholars. Now, you don't need to go and learn each an individual scholar, but the most important one. How did Imam Bukhari use those? How did Imam Ahmad use those? The kind of 7 or 9 scholars of Jarh Ta'dil. How does Imam Nasai use those? How does Imam Darqutni use it? How does Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi use it? How does Abu Zur'a al-Razi use it? How does Yahya ibn Ma'in use it? How does Ali ibn al-Madini use it? How does al-Jawzajani use it? So these are the kind of the 9 scholars that really matter when it comes to Jarh and Ta'dil. Yeah. So is that okay? وقد انقضى ما يتعلق بالمتن من حيث القبول والرد. Now the discussion of what it constitutes accepting the matan and rejecting the matan has now completed. So basically it's that we've completed the entire section of at-ta'n. Ta'n is of 2 types: ta'n fil isnad. Ta'n fil isnad is, depending if it's in the beginning of the isnad, it's mu'allaq. If it's at the end of the isnad, it's called mursal. If it's in the middle of the isnad and it's only one, then it's called munqati'. Or if it's 2 and they're separated, that's also called munqati'. And if there's 2 consecutively, then that is called mu'dal. If it is khafi, then if due to the fact that there is mu'asara and liqa, then that is called tadlis. And if it's only to do with mu'asara and not liqa, then that is called mursal khafi. Then we go to the ta'an fil matan and ta'an fil the hadith, and we looked at the kadhab. We looked at the kadhab's hadith is mawdu', then we look at the tuhma, then we looked at the fahsh ghalat, we looked at the ghafil, we looked at the fasiq, these are all munkar. We looked at the bid'ah, we looked at mukhalafa, we looked at I'm not remembering all the 10. We looked at the Ahlul Bid'ah, we looked at Su'ul Hifz, we looked at the Majhulul Ain, and the Majhulul Hal. The Majhulul Hal is called Mastur. So these are all of the categories that we looked at. That discussion is now completed. So we have 20 minutes. Do you have any questions before I move on to the next section?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have. Oh, sorry, Hussein, you
Omar,
can
go
go
on,
first.
Omar,
go
go
on,
first.
go on, Omar.
No, I was just gonna say, Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah does not seem to have given an exact number in terms of the amount that would raise the hadith to Hasan li ghayrihi. Is it just if there's two mu'tabar rawis that narrate the hadith that it's
No, I don't think it's that straightforward. I think that will depend on the status of the Rawi itself.
got it?
So
Okay,
it will be more of a qualitative rather than just kind of a algorithm based approach. Yeah.
got it.
Naam, Hussein.
So with the Sul Hifz, there's two types. The Lazim, which is just rejected. That's Shadh, right?
Shaz, according to some scholars, those scholars who basically say that mukhalafa is not a condition of shaz, and those scholars who basically say that mukhalafa is a condition of shaz, according to them, then this is da'if. Yeah.
And then the second type is obviously if that issue isn't inherent. So the term mukhtalit, is
Yeah.
that the name for the second type?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's technically it's lazim and then mukhtalit.
Yeah, it's called mukhtal tari, but then they have their own, like for example, the kadhab zarawi is called mawdu', the tuhma is called is what was it called?
Muttaham.
Muttaham bil kadhib.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
different.
the hadith of this type is called a mukhtalit.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
ثم الإسناد هو الطريق الموصلة إلى المتن. So now we come on to discussing um, the the types of hadith as far as the matan is concerned. So he's basically saying al-isnad wa tariq al-musila ila al-matani. It's the path that reaches to the matan. Now, here Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani is contradicting himself. Yeah. Previously in the beginning when he was discussing the what the hadith is and what is the sanad, he basically said sanad is the pathway to a matan, and isnad is حكاية حكاية عن الطريق إلى المتن. Well, حكاية basically means to say that this is the isnad, to narrate that this is the isnad, as opposed to the isnad itself. The sanad is the isnad itself, but al-isnad is حكاية عن طريق المتن, right? That it is to say that this is the sanad. That's what he said in the beginning of the book. But now he's contradicting himself and he's saying al-isnadu huwa tariq al-musila ila al-matan, which isnad is the pathway to the matan, which is actually the definition of the sanad, which basically means that distinction that he drew in the beginning of the book is actually an artificial distinction. It's just a lughawi lexical distinction, but interchangeably people use the word sanad and isnad to mean the same thing. But if you're really going to be pedantic about it and you want to distinguish between an isnad and a sanad, the sanad is a tariq al-musila ila al-matan, and at the isnad, which is a mastar has a verb with it, asnada yusnid, is hikayatun an tariq al-musila ila al-matan. But that again is hair splitting. Does that make sense? So I just wanted you to kind of take you back to that discussion at the beginning. Here, by isnad, he basically means sanad, but again, it just shows that even according to him, that split of difference between isnad and sanad is just an artificial split. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
وهو
Yes.
الطريق الموصلة إلى المتن، والمتن هو غاية ما ينتهي إليه الإسناد من الكلام. So what is the matan? The matan, remember the word matan comes from, matan literally means the back. Yeah, matanu dabba. It is the back of the horse or of the camel. So here, so it's basically so in a way it's the thing that shoulders the isnad. But here he said it is the end. ما ينتهي إلى الإسناد من الكلام. It is the speech. Yeah, هو and min bayania is of هو. It is the speech to which the isnad ends. The isnad ends at that speech. Yeah, this basically also tells us which way to read the isnad. Do we read the isnad according to transmission, or do we read the isnad according to reception? If we read the isnad according to transmission, then we're reading downwards from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If we read the isnad according to reception, then we read it upwards from the muhaddis such as Imam al-Bukhari. um, and sometimes it gets confusing which way are we reading the isnad. For the purpose of hadith studies, we always say that the bidayatul isnad, the beginning of isnad, is where the muhaddis sits, such as Imam Bukhari. So Imam Bukhari will sit at the beginning of the isnad, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will sit at the end of the isnad. The isnad ends and the matan starts. So that's how you remember. The isnad ends and the matan starts. وَهُوَ غَايَةُ مَا يَنْتَهِي إِلَيْهِ الْإِسْنَادِ. Okay. But when we say what is the asl of the isnad, then the asl of the isnad is from the point of view of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabi, because that's where the isnad emanates from. So two distinctions: bidayatul isnad and the asl of the isnad. Sometimes the asl of the isnad is also called the madarul isnad, the pivot of the isnad. The madar might be at the Sahabi or it might be at the Tabi'i. So these are nuanced technical definitions that you shouldn't get confused, or else you will come up with wrong conclusions. Bidayatul isnad and aslul isnad. Bidayatul isnad starts from the muhaddith and it ends with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember it that way, that where the isnad ends, the matan starts. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Wahuwa, yeah, and the matan. So wahuwa ay al matan imma ay yantahi ila nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Either the so it's actually the isnad, not the matan. Wahuwa ay al isnad either ends to the Prophet reaches the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it comprises of his words, loves, ويقتضي لفظه, and it comprises of his words. إما تصريحا, either clearly, conspicuously, clearly, inconspicuously, that this is clearly the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أو حكما, or it's hukmi, that it's not directly reaching the Prophet ﷺ, is reaching a Sahabi, but we can basically say that this is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though a Sahabi is saying it. For example, if we were to just give an example and then we come back to it, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu saying that the Taraweeh prayer is 20 rakats. Now we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have 20 rakats Taraweeh. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala instituting that will basically constitute a marfu hadith. How? We're just going to look at that. Is that okay? أن المنقول بذلك أو حكما, yeah, إما تصريحا أو حكما, then there should have been a tab here, and the أن المنقول should have been on the next line, that it's talking both about the تصريح and the حكم. أن المنقول بذلك الإسناد من قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو من فعله أو من تقريره, that whatever has been transmitted through this isnad is either the words of the Prophet ﷺ, or his actions, or his silent approvals. I was going to give you an example. مثال
Sorry,
المرفوع.
Manas, really sorry. Just quickly, just before this, if you scroll up a little bit, the last line from the previous page. What's the emphasis here about loves? ويقتضي لفظه. Because here there's no mention of fail or anything like that. It just says loves. Not understanding what the emphasis here is about. Like, why was loves here singled out?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's because it's the. I'll have to look at the shuruhat where they say why he says that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shukran.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I don't know. مثال المرفوع من القول تصريحا أن يقول الصحابي. So this is called مرفوع. Yeah. He hasn't given us the name. إما أن ينتهي إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ويقتضي لفظه إما أو. So he hasn't actually told us that, but he's just telling us now مثال المرفوع. Yeah. مثال المرفوع من القول. So this is called مرفوع رفع إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The concept of rafa, which is basically called raising or elevating the isnad, is something that the Orientalists have a field day with. They have noticed that there are so many ahadith which ends with a tabi'i or a sahabi, but later in history, I mean, like few years or 100 years later, those same things are now projected on the through the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ. So they call this back projection or retrojection, and elevating and raising the hadith or rafa'a. So they have a field day. They have a whole theory around this of rafa. And they basically like Joseph Schacht was of the opinion the hadith is a later innovation. Actually, because the rafa, we see that the rafa to the Prophet ﷺ happened later on during the Abbasid period. But when this hadith, if you trace this hadith, we see that it might be the opinion of a tabi'i or opinion of a sahabi. It's only later on that we find that it is doing rafa on the Prophet ﷺ. That's something that they deal with. We don't actually deal with that. مثال المرفوع من القول تصور أن يقول الصحابي سمعت رسول الله يقول كذا أو حدثنا رسول الله بكذا أو يقول هو أو غيره. That I heard the Prophet say this, or the Prophet said this to us, أو يقول هو أو غيره, or he says or someone else says قال رسول الله كذا أو عن رسول الله أنه قال كذا ونحو ذلك. ومثال المرفوع من الفعل تصريحا, and the clear example of مرفوع actions is أن يقول الصحابي رأيت رسول الله فعل كذا أو يقول هو أو غيره كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يفعل كذا. ومثال المرفوع من التقرير صريحا أن يقول الصحابي فعلت بحضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كذا أو يقول هو أو غيره فعل فلان بحضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كذا ولا يذكر إنكاره لذلك. So the important thing in the taqreer is that there isn't an inkar from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Something has been done in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not do inkar of it. ومثال المرفوع من القوم حكما لا تصريحا, and the marfu hadith, the technical, here you won't say legal, you'll say technically a marfu hadith, if not really, but technically a marfu hadith is أن يقول الصحابي الذي لم يأخذ عن الإسرائيليات ما لا مجال للاجتهاد فيه ولا له تعليق أو كالإخبار. Okay, leave this a bit out, because that's kind of like in the brackets. أن يقول الصحابي كالإخبار عن الأمور الماضية من بدء الخلق وأخبار الأنبياء أو الآتية كالملاحم والفتن وأحوال يوم القيامة. وكذا الإخبار عما يحصل بفعله ثواب مخصوص أو عقاب مخصوص. So the technical مرفوع hadith, which is not a real actual مرفوع hadith, but is technically is حكما مرفوع hadith, is the Sahabi tells us, يقول الصحابي tells us about previous communities, such as the beginning of creation, or stories about the Anbiya, or future events such as Malahim and Fitnas and wars, or tells us about the Yawmul Qiyamah. Similarly, they tell us about actions with specific thawab, or sins which have got specific adab, specific punishments. So because a Sahabi does not get wahi, a Sahabi is not able to know about the Qasasul Anbiya and the historical data, we will have to assume that this is coming from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Or a Sahabi does not get wahi and therefore they don't get predictions about the future. And if the Sahabi is making a prediction about the future, then we will have to assume that this is a hadith marfu, or the Sahabi is telling an amal and giving us khas thawab or khas iqab, punishment on that. The Sahabi is not shari' and cannot tell us that if you read this, then you will get this 1,000 thawab, and therefore we will have to assume that it's coming from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. All of these are possible if the conditions are met. And what are the conditions? الذي لم يأخذ عن الإسرائيليات. That Sahabi who is known to not take from the Ahlul Kitab. So Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu automatically is excluded from this. Abdullah ibn Abbas used to take quite a lot from the Ahlul Kitab. Yeah. So if he was to tell us something about the Akhirah, or if he was to tell us something about the previous communities and Anbiya, then that will not be in the hukum of a marfu hadith, because he is known to have taken from the Israeliyat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Or the second condition, and not or, and ما لا مجال للاجتهاد فيه. There is no scope for ijtihad in this. So this Sahabi might not be known to take from the Israeliyat. However, the thing that he's discussing, it might be an ijtihadi issue. And if it's an ijtihadi issue and the Sahabi is coming out of his ijtihad, so for example, the Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu gathering everyone onto one Jama'at is an ijtihadi issue. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu putting a moratorium, a stop on the hands cutting for the thieves during a famine is an ijtihadi issue.
Right.
There is a valid ijtihad behind that. If you can understand the reasoning, then you won't count that as a hukum of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Similarly, ولا له تعلق ببيان لغة أو شرح غريب, and it does not have any connection with linguistic explanations or explanations of gharib lafz, because sometimes the Sahabi might be telling us something and he might basically be taking that nukat out, that subtle point out, based on the lugha itself, right? That the lugha accommodates this. So if it is free from these three conditions, then the and the Sahabi is coming out with one of these, then we have to accept that this is a marfu' hukman. If the Sahabi if any of these conditions are found, then we will not basically deem that to be a hadith which is seen as marfu' hukman. So for example, an example would be Sayyidina Jabir radiallahu ta'ala, who says that we used to practice azla Azla is coitus interruption. Coitus interruption is before the man ejaculates, he retrieves his penis and he ejaculates outside rather than inside of the woman. It was kind of a natural contraception. So he says we used to practice ajala, azal, whilst the Quran was being revealed. Yeah, whilst the Quran was being revealed. So this is a marfu' hukman. Why? Because he's trying to say if this was haram or illegal to do, then wahi would have revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the fact that wahi did not reveal to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that we were doing this. This then constitutes a marfu' hukman. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
وإنما كان له حكم المرفوع لأن إخباره بذلك يقتضي مخبرا له مجال للاجتهاد فيه يقتضي موقفا للقائل به ولا موقف للصحابة إلا النبي أو بعض من يخبر عن الكتب القديمة فلهذا وقع الاحتراز عن القسم الثالث. Okay, so we'll leave it here. He's giving a justification and we will pick up on this in 2 weeks time, inshallah. Is that okay?
Inshallah.
Yeah,
Any questions?
inshallah.
Just one question. Sorry, I forgot to ask before. Those types that you the one with the Surah Hifz and all of that, you mentioned that can be Tawabit with the Mu'tabar, etc. So one was Surah Hifz. The other one is Mukhtalit alladhi lam yatamayyaz. What's the translation for that? So the Mukhtalit where you can't determine which ones were happened after, like they lost their memory.
After and before, yeah, there's a confusion.
So it's when you can't determine.
Yeah, there is a possibility that it might be before, but you can't say for 100% sure.
Okay, obviously that's because if you can determine, then they will be treated as accepted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Barakallahu feek. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.